dear listeners, into a world of the unknown, where ordinary tasks morph into extraordinary tales of horror. Today we journey into the unsuspecting sphere of babysitting. It is a job often painted as simple and innocent, marked by lullabies and bedtime stories, where the biggest challenges are often regarded as pacifying a crying child or managing mealtimes. However, beneath these everyday tasks, lying hidden in the shadows of the mundane, there unfolds three spine-chilling tales. The first tale is a saga of a nocturnal terror that turns a peaceful house into a haunting nightmare. The second tale takes a turn into the supernatural, shifting from the everyday world into a realm where the rules of nature no longer apply. The third tale, possibly more unnerving than the rest, deals with an innocent mind's descent towards madness. Each tale more harrowing than the last, these stories will make you reconsider the seemingly benign task of watching over little ones. No longer will babysitting merely comprise of diapers, singing lullabies, or being a guardian in the parent's absence. It will become a chilling undertaking that requires more than just patience and care. So, dear listeners, brace yourselves, steel your nerves, and prepare to dive into our first tale of terror. In our inaugural story, we're transported into an idyllic suburban neighborhood, where tranquility masks a chilling encounter for a young babysitter. In the city's most peaceful enclave, amidst rows of quaint houses with white picket fences, the eerie narrative unfolds. The babysitter, an intelligent university student named Emily, had been tasked with looking after a young boy, Thomas. A routine evening was anticipated, a job she was well accustomed to, or so she believed. The sun started its descent, scattering long, ominous shadows across the room, and Emily noticed something uncanny. Little Thomas, usually a ball of lively energy, was displaying a peculiar silence. He occupied a corner, his back turned, whispering into the dimly lit void. Emily, intrigued yet slightly on edge, questioned him about his odd conversation. "My friend," Thomas cryptically responded. The evening advanced, and Thomas's whispers escalated in volume and urgency. The once laughter-filled room now echoed with hushed conversations and an uncomfortable tranquility. Emily attempted to interact with Thomas, to divert his attention from his invisible interlocutor, but he appeared spellbound, his small eyes reflecting an unholy mixture of fear and fascination. The room's atmosphere morphed into something oppressive, the tension palpable. Every clock tick reverberated through the silence, magnifying Emily's escalating unease. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, a wave of dread slowly engulfing her. She reassured herself, attributing Thomas's bizarre behavior to a child's vivid imagination. However, Thomas's actions took a disturbingly drastic turn. His laughter morphed into a maniacal cackle, followed by tears and then laughter again. His whispers evolved into terrified screams, his petite figure trembling under the weight of an unseen tormentor. Emily's blood ran cold, a chill running down her spine as she observed the horrifying spectacle, knew it was time to flee. In her haste, she gathered her belongings without taking her eyes off the shaking child. As she cautiously moved towards the front door, Thomas's whispers followed her, a ghostly echo in the silent house. His high, petrified voice pierced through the quiet as she struggled with the lock, her hands trembling. At last, she burst into the chilly night, leaving the whispering child to his unseen companion. As Emily sprinted down the serene suburban street, Thomas's voice echoed in her ears, an icy reminder of the invisible entity she had left her wake. When Emily fled the house, she left behind the whispering child, eternally tormented by the unseen entity. Our next saga transports us to an ominously lit nursery, where a formless shadow lurks, biding its time for the lights to nestle in the tranquility of a suburban neighborhood. A babysitter named Clara discovers herself trapped in a disquieting predicament. She's been enlisted to oversee a cherubic toddler in a Victorian house that's weathered the ravages of time and possibly cradles enigmatic secrets. On this particular night, the moon is nothing more than a faint sliver in the sky, casting an unsettling illumination into the nursery. The room bursts with endearing relics of a bygone era. Still, the antique rocking horse almost imperceptibly rocks back and forth in the faint light, setting an eerie ambience. What grips Clara's attention is not the groaning old toys, but an unplaceable shadow. This shadow, a vague formless shape, lurks ominously in the corner, as cast by an invisible presence. Clara attempts to shrug it off, attributing it to the flickering light of the antique lamp or her weary eyes playing tricks on her. But as the hours wear on, the shadow begins to swell with an uncanny rhythm, becoming increasingly menacing. The toddler continues to slumber peacefully, seemingly oblivious to the escalating threat in the room. Yet Clara finds herself spellbound, unable to dispel the mounting sense of trepidation. She watches, paralyzed, as the shadow seems to move of its own accord, contorting and shifting as if possessed with a life of its own. It elongates across the wall, encroaching towards the crib with an insidious patience that sends Clara's heart into a frenzy. As the clock chimes away the hours, the shadow takes on a more assertive presence. It's not just a shapeless silhouette anymore. It seems to pulsate with a sinister intent, almost as if developing a will of its own. Clara can feel the temperatures plummeting, the air growing icier with each passing minute. Each creak of the house, each whisper of the wind sends a chill racing down her spine. In the dead of the night, the shadow crescendos into a terrifying spectacle, shrouding the entire room in a darkness so thick it feels tangible. Clara can no longer discern the walls, the crib, the antique toys. All she can perceive is the shadow, pulsating, throbbing with an eerie life of its own. The night becomes an endless ordeal, every second a nerve-wracking standoff for Clara. She keeps her gaze locked onto the crib, praying fervently for dawn's arrival. And then, as the first rays of sunlight pierce the nursery window, the malevolent shadow starts to recede. It shrinks back steadily, retreating to the corner from whence it emerged, until it finally dissipates entirely, leaving no vestige of its petrifying presence. As sun finally ascended, the sinister shadow evaporated, leaving behind a petrified babysitter, indelibly scarred by a night filled with unspeakable horror. Our last chilling chronicle transports us to a picturesque Victorian dwelling, where the chilling secret of an antiquated doll lies in wait. Unsuspecting, our young babysitter was thrust into the uncanny presence that shrouded this seemingly peaceful house. The tale took roots with a doll, a worn-out toy relic of bygone days. It had a faded dress and a porcelain face that bore the of time. The babysitter's attention was first caught by the old doll, sitting smugly on an elevated shelf, its lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. As the dusky evening matured, she couldn't dismiss an odd feeling that something about doll was not quite right. It almost felt as if the doll was following her with its empty gaze, subtly shifting its position every time she cast a glance at it. She dismissed it as a product of her imagination, a distorted perception caused by the dim, flickering light. But then, a weird phenomenon. The doll's expression began to alter. The once impassive porcelain smile transformed into a sly smirk, a malevolent twist of the mouth that sent a bolt of terror down her spine. Haunted, the babysitter decided to hide the eerie doll in a far corner of a cobwebbed cupboard, hoping to alleviate her growing anxiety. But as she returned to the cozy comfort of the living room, she was met with an unsettling sight. The doll was back in its place, perched comfortably on the plush sofa as if it had always been there. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she stared at the doll in disbelief. She was certain she had locked it away. As the night aged, the babysitter tried her best to ignore the porcelain nightmare, but the unease lingered, a frosty dread that made her flesh crawl. The anticipation of leaving the house and its unnerving occupant was mounting. Gathering her belongings, she was taken aback when her fingers brushed against a hard, cold object in her bag. She pulled it out with a gasp. It was the doll. Its glassy eyes bore into hers, its porcelain smile mutated into a wicked smirk. The babysitter was by the doll's uncanny reappearance. It felt as though the doll had transported itself into her bag, refusing to be forgotten. In a wave of panic, she flung the doll against the wall, desperate to break the inexplicable bond it seemed to have formed with her. She bolted out of the house, her heart hammering against her chest, her thoughts a whirlwind of disturbing questions. As the babysitter abandoned the unnerving doll, she was consumed by a lingering sensation that she was still under surveillance. Phantom imprint of the doll's vacant gaze seemed to hang in the air, a lingering nightmare of the night's macabre incidents. As we conclude our journey into the great unknown, we are left with a profound reminder of the extraordinary that can be concealed within the confines of the ordinary. Let us reflect upon the chilling tales we've uncovered, Our first encounter was with the whispering child. This was no usual innocent game of hide and seek. Tucked away in a gloomy corner of an old house, the whispers of the child echoed hauntingly. These whispers gradually built into a deafening chorus of unfamiliar voices, none of which seemed to belong to the child. The babysitter's heart raced uncontrollably as a cold sense of fear took over. A chilling silence followed the cacophony, leaving us all in a dread-filled suspense, speculating what could possibly lurk in the dark of an innocent child's whispers. Next, we delved into the unnerving tale of the sinister shadow. An otherwise regular babysitting night in a suburban home gradually warped into a night of relentless terror. As the evening wore on, a shadow emerged from the dimly lit corners of the room. This shadow, not present before, appeared to have a life of its own. It danced menacingly around the room as the babysitter's fear became almost tangible. Each flicker of the shadow brought with it an overwhelming dread and suspense that made our very skin crawl. Last but certainly not least, we encountered the unsettling doll. What was once a harmless porcelain plaything morphed into a horrifying object. The babysitter's apprehension grew as the doll seemed to follow her around the spacious, dimly lit room, its porcelain face never leaving her sight. The doll's lifeless glass eyes seemed to have a story to tell. A story, or perhaps secret, that could make even the bravest man's blood run cold. These stories, ordinary situations twisted into extraordinary tales of terror, serve as reminders of the inexplicable mysteries that often lie hidden just beyond the edge of our understanding. As unsettling as they are haunting, these tales leave us not just with a sense of unease, but with a heightened awareness of the unknown. So remember, dear listeners, the next time you find yourself alone in a house with a child, a shadow, or a doll, do tread lightly, for you might just stumble upon your own spine-chilling story of terror.